Welcome to the Future of Less Work, where we explore how work is transforming one conversation at a time. I'm Nirit Cohen, and today's episode will argue that people-centered leadership creates more long-term value than control. And AI works best when it's amplifying human capability rather than replacing it. My guest today has been one of the clearest voices arguing that going backwards on how we treat and manage work, flexibility, and people expectations is not a strategy. In fact, he believes organizations trying to rebuild command and control leadership are heading straight into a dead end, and framing AI as cost-cutting is just dangerous. Brian Elliott is the CEO of Work Forward, executive in residence at Charter, and senior advisor with BCG. He's a leadership advisor, best-selling author, and future of work expert who spent 30 years building teams as a startup CEO and executive at Google and Slack. And I am a big fan. Brian, welcome to Future of Less Work.
Thanks, Nirit. Great to be here with you.
So we met online a few years ago. I remember when RTO was this really big thing, return to office, right? And I kept saying that return to the future is not a possible direction. And your Flex Index was my go-to source for data and helping organizations understand that difference, right, between the headlines and what was actually going on. So let's start there. Where are we on flexibility these days?
So the headlines still get filled with the stuff that grabs your attention, which is the latest CEO to declare, I want everybody back in the office 5 days a week. The numbers, though, don't bear that out. The average still is something like 67% of firms have some form of flexibility. About a third of firms have a 5-day week in office policy. You would think, given all the back and forth, the noise around this and all the headlines, that number would have changed sizably in the past couple of years. It's moved 2% in the US.
So it's interesting. It's not just the headlines. I mean, you'd think, but I think we argue, right, that the fact that they keep reverting to those headlines means it's not working. But right. You'd think AI would have changed that. If there was this feeling, right, if you pair that with the AI replacing people, we're firing people, putting in tools, you'd think that would have reverted, and it's not, right?
You would think so. The main reason why a lot of CEOs are doing this, though, is a lack of trust. It's not because they think that getting you together in person is actually going to change things dramatically. That may be true for the people that are saying, look, 2 to 3 days a week, we think is a better answer. 2 to 3 days a week might be a better answer in some organizations, and especially for teams that are actually co-located in the first place. But anytime you got somebody saying 5 days a week is the right answer, it's a control issue and a lack of trust. If at the same time, you're also saying to that same team, I want you all to adopt AI and I want you to adopt it faster and I'm going to measure whether you're doing it or not, you're sort of doubling down on activity as being your goal, right? I want you in the office. I want you, I want to track your AI usage. And it's a signal to employees that you don't have a lot of trust in them to figure this stuff out for themselves or among their team.
So I want to play devil's advocate because sure. I agree with you. But here's where I struggle these days, right? You look at what's going on with AI, and we are saying that we need to actually completely redesign what is possible. So part of this thing, right, is that people have brought this tool and they're using it for personal productivity, and organizations are trying to figure out what is possible. And to do that, some of the barriers, and trust's a big one, but we'll bend that for a minute. Some of the barriers have to do with the fact that we need to disassemble the way things worked, right? So we completely move to tasks and rethink processes and workflows.
Yeah.
And so I've been wondering whether maybe now they're actually right in trying to bring people in, because each one of us individually, not co-located, is a harder way to rethink work processes.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that in terms of the need for people to think through it and sort through it. There's a couple of challenges, though. One of which is, are the teams co-located in the first place? So if the answer there often is no, they're not. Like CBRE has data that I shared about 6 months ago. Something like 40% of all teams are already distributed, meaning my manager doesn't even work in the same city as me. And so saying come into the office 3, 4, 5 days a week in order to sort out, a redesign of how we work. If you're not coming to the same office, you're already on sort of shaky ground around this stuff. There's really a lot of value, though, in getting teams together to do some of that work episodically, meaning to sit there and say, what we're going to do is we're going to kick this project off in terms of redesign. What that means is we're going to fly in the people who don't live in the same town. We're going to have a team gathering where we're going to spend 3 or 4 or 5 days together. And we're going to use that time to get at what are our goals in AI adoption in the first place? Why are we trying to do this? We're going to actually have learning exercises that we do together. That's one possible reason for doing it. I'll also say that I've seen so many examples of companies that are actually doing a great job of getting team-based AI adoption, and where the people are located is irrelevant in the equation. And here's why. What matters the most is that you've got a manager and a team that are actually doing it together. The most effective training programs I've seen are actually people that spend over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, they're taking a dedicated chunk of everything else off the plate, meaning you're going to lower the goals and the outcomes during that month and that period. Every day, the team is working through a set of exercises together. And you're actually sitting there learning how to use these tools with your teammates. Now, you can do that all in the same room. You could do that in separate rooms. The main thing is you're doing it where you're actually having some shared learning over, here's the thing I tried, here's what worked, here's what didn't. And more importantly, you're having this conversation along with your manager about the norms. What's acceptable use? Is it okay for me to be using this? Because one of the biggest impediments is, how do you get people the time and space to learn? And the other is, what are people's emotional reactions to this?
Yeah.
And the biggest way to overcome the fear is to actually talk about it together.
Because we're positioning it these days. I mean, the headlines again are positioning it as we'll bring in the tools and replace you, right? And so naturally there's that fear. And so can we circle back to that? Because I see a very connecting line, right, between where we started, which was kind of the post-COVID flexibility. I actually called it a new social contract for work, where people want to think differently about where work starts and life ends, and it's different, right? Or reverse, right? I meant to say that backwards. And then there's also AI that comes into that same space. And what are the motivators for people? Why would they follow you? So the command and control that drove people back, or drove leaders to get people back to the office, is the same command and control that's trying to push this tool or tool suite or technology in as a productivity for the purpose of the company saving money and having, using less people.
Yeah. And that's where you get quickly into, if you're using if the metric that you're measuring is, are people using the tool? And then you're judging or grading them on use of the tool. It's the same as judging or grading them on how many days do they show up in the office, or how many hours do they spend hitting keystrokes on their computer, right? You're measuring and monitoring them on the basis of activity. People will find a way to do the activity. They may or may not do the activity in a way that's actually useful to you. They may or may not have it focused on goals and outcomes at the end of the day. So what I've seen pretty consistently in Katie George, who's at Microsoft these days, talks about this in terms of, we've stopped worrying about people's adoption of AI, because we know that in the teams where we've set them up right, where we've given them the tools, the training, where we've actually figured out specific use cases and workflows, like with their sales teams, we know that the tools can actually make them more effective and more productive. We're judging them on the basis of their productivity and on their outcomes. Are you actually getting more sales generated coming through? Because we know that by using these tools, we can get you more time with your customers and less time on administration. Therefore, what we should be measuring you on is, how many times are you interacting with customers? What's your revenue growth look like? As opposed to sweating, are you using the tool? Because we know the tool will make you better.
And yet we're seeing the data, right? A lot of organizations haven't figured out what exactly they should be using it for as measured by outcomes.
That's right.
Have you seen examples or methodologies that get them there?
Yeah, the best stuff tends to be, how do I actually think about, I'll give you an example. Zapier. I've talked with their team extensively about their usage of it. They actually started this with their customer service team now 18 months ago, because everybody knows that AI is coming for customer service. Bluntly, every piece of technology has come after customer service, right? Like between offshoring and bots for a decade plus now at this point in time. So the leader of that group, Lauren Franklin, sat down with her team and said, look, this is going to automate a lot of the base level of this job. We will provide you the tools and training. I'll be in the queues with you as we test this stuff and see what's working and what's not. But the demands on you from a productivity are going to go up. They're going to go up by about 2x over the course of the next year or so, if we're right. If all of you invest along with me in the time, in the training, and getting into this, there will be jobs because our company is growing for you in the future. But you've got to put the time and effort into it too. What they measured explicitly were three things. They measured the productivity of the customer service team, right? Which everybody can find metrics on that one. It's pretty straightforward. It's things like how many tickets closed on a per hour basis. The second thing they measured was quality. What's customer satisfaction? Are we actually making customers happier or worse? And the third thing that they measured, God forbid, was employee engagement. Are our employees actually happier as they go through this? And they found that by actually putting the time and effort into it with the team, Lauren literally was in the queues testing the stuff out for several hours every Monday morning. They got people engaged in it. They got people reskilled and more capable, taking on more complex projects. They started taking on more things that felt like upselling rather than just answering tickets. And what they got out of it was a doubling of productivity, much higher customer satisfaction scores, and like all of their employee engagement scores went up by 20 to 30 points.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think, right? Because people stop acting like bots and start acting like humans. So what do you think is, I was almost going to say, what aren't the leaders getting? Those that the way that they're messaging this is to say, get on board, or, you're going to be out of your job, or we've seen all sorts of messages like that.
Yeah, I think it's the assumption that by setting this up as competition, you're going to get more out of people. You see the same thing, by the way, in this sort of stack ranking of performance that's become more popular in tech. So I spent 25 years in tech firms, and big tech firms and small tech firms. We've swung the pendulum, right? And so what you're seeing right now is in big tech, I'm going to crank up the demands on you from a productivity standpoint. I'm going to measure your AI usage. I'm going to penalize you if you're not using it. And it feels very much like I'm in competition with the rest of my peers. What that does...
Which we always were. I mean, I spent 30 years in tech. We always had the competition and the ground was always moving. But it was never about, it was people replacing you. It was not about tools replacing you. It was still clear that people were the essence of the value proposition that made the company who they were or not.
Yeah. Although the one thing I would say is there's a big difference between my competition is for a promotion versus my competition is, am I going to be in the bottom 5%, 10%, 15% that gets automatically whacked? So that actually, the history of that in terms of like a forced rank with removal was popular in GE in the 90s and Microsoft in the 2000s.
Yeah, I worked for Intel. We had that bottom 5% at folk on performance reviews for years. I was going to say decades, but I'm not thinking. I think I'm wrong.
Microsoft did it in particular under Steve Ballmer, and it got really popular. It was also the time frame that's known as Microsoft's lost decade. And there's studies that actually show that what happens is you get internal competition instead of external competition. People are focused on, I don't have to be faster than, I just need to be faster than the lowest person performing in this team. So I'm not going to be as cooperative with my teammates. I'm actually not going to.
And they'll bring AI into this, right? I mean, if you want the whole group to move with AI and you're measuring me, you're pitting me against each other, right? Then I'm going to keep my AI tools to myself. I'm not going to teach other people because I'm sitting here thinking, what aren't they getting? And frankly, we've been there before. Like I said, I worked for Intel for 3 decades. We had this kind of performance management system. We moved away. Now we might have moved away too much, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But this idea that you can't pit people against each other is not a good thing for the company.
No, it's not. It's also showing up. There's a piece in HBR that dropped just this last week. Gabriella Kellerman, who was at BetterUp, she's now at BCG, did this piece on AI brain fry. AI brain fry is not the sort of emotional burnout. It's like the mental burnout of I'm using multiple tools or multiple agents, right? Like I'm an engineer and I've got 2, 3, 4, 5 Claude code agents that I'm working with simultaneously. You get to a point where the cognitive load of that is really high. And the costs are people get burned out, they want to quit, and they start committing like pretty major errors, like things that face a customer or that could cause all kinds of problems. What they describe in the research is those efforts get mitigated if people are actually feel like they're doing this in cooperation with each other. If the goals are team-centered goals, if the manager is talking with them about like what's acceptable use, how should they be using this, the manager is encouraging them to take breaks, then you lower the error rates and you lower the burnout. If instead the setup is, I feel like I'm in competition with everybody else, so therefore I've got to pile on more and more, what you get more burnout, you get more desire to quit. By the way, these are your biggest AI adopters. These are your champions, the people you want to keep around. And the major error rate they had on this was a 39% increase.
This is really interesting because this is where I circle right back to the flexibility conversation. I think one of the interesting questions for me was who gets the value of the time that AI generates. And I think there's a negotiation going on because the way you get burnout is I'm doing 100%, 400%, 1000% more because I'm still giving you all of my time just generating more. And that might not be sustainable. It also might not be motivational because maybe I want to negotiate and it's okay that I can do a lot more in 2 hours less.
That's right. That's right. And I think what you've got is the difference between like, there are human-centered leaders out there that sit there and go, I've had this conversation with folks. We had it back in the day at Slack. Look, I don't care if you work 4 days a week, as long as you're able to be there for your team when your team needs you and you're able to hit the commitments that you've got, right? You've got a set of commitments. When and how you get them done is up to you, putting aside the fact that you and your team have to have an agreement around when you're available to each other to help answer questions and triage problems, all the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
Knock your socks off. Then there's the other side of it, which is, why would you ever allow that to happen when I know that every employee I'm not getting the optimal amount of output out of? So I'm going to treat them as factory widgets. I'm going to ask them to pedal faster and faster. I'm going to put more technology in so they can pedal even faster, not thinking about what some of those negative consequences might look like. Not to mention, when you treat them that way, you and I know this, like when you treat human beings that way, what happens is they start checking the box. They're like, I know that now I'm in competition with everybody else. I know I need to produce output, but am I really going to give it my all? Am I going to really scrub it from a quality perspective? Am I really going to care at the end of the day, aside from I'm producing what you asked me to produce?
Yeah. To me, I don't know, maybe it's hopeful, but I think of AI as different because it is a tool in the hands of people. So ultimately, the person that gets pushed to beyond their limits and the organizational setup can step away, especially if they're, top of the line user and they know what they're doing, right? Step away and generate a different way, a different value stream. And we're seeing in the data, right? We're seeing the independent economy. We're seeing people do more than one thing. They've learned a lesson, since COVID, especially. I don't think that organizations will be able to push people to their limits because I think people won't agree. Plus, the demographics tell you that there's not going to be enough people anyway. Yeah,
no, I agree with that too. I think the US has a very specific problem in that your employer is also your healthcare provider. And so people often, get attached because of that and don't have much of a choice around it. But what they're going to do is the side gigs will multiply, right? I'm going to do what I need to do to check the box and to not get fired at my corporate job, at my big corporate job, because I need the paycheck, but also I need the healthcare insurance. But what I'll do on the side is build my side business, right? And that'll grow. And when it gets to be big enough, then I'll take the plunge and get out of the company. But I'm also seeing companies that are actually figuring this out in a more positive way, meaning they're actually thinking about expansion and growth as potential, God forbid, right? Because what you've got now with these tools is the ability for somebody who is a product manager to do the work that an engineer and a designer used to be required to do alongside them, at least to the point where they can get a prototype in the hands of a customer, right? So why not actually find a way to run? This is a friend of mine at a fairly good sized company was saying, our aim is not to try to make everybody 10% more efficient. That's just, that's a lovely little game, but it doesn't get you big payout. What I want is 10x more experiments. I want 10 times as many pilots going on out there. So, because if we yield even 20% on those, I'm doubling my growth rate. I'll
Right.
take
And
a
now,
doubling of my growth rate over a 10% efficiency gain any day of the week from a P&L standpoint.
exactly. And now you circle back to performance reviews and how you measure people, right? And
Oh my God.
if you actually need to, and I mean, I really love the example you gave where we actually said, okay, this month we're gonna do less, right? Because I called this slow down to speed up. So you have to slow down these days. Even the very basic finance analyst, if they walk into this regular review meeting with an Excel, their leader should send them back and say, go do it some other way. Show me that you've learned something, right? So we should be slowing down the systems these days, and we should be building slack, and we should not be speeding them up. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I had a firm, which is a fintech company here based in San Francisco. They had the realization that, like, okay, agentic coding is really a thing. We've got to get deeper on this, and we've got to get deeper fast. Instead of just shouting that, from the CEO mountaintop, what they did is they took 950 people and said, all of you, nothing in the next week from a project perspective goes forward. No meetings, no work on the usual backlog of stuff. If it's an interview with somebody that we're trying to hire, then please take it. If it's an urgent bug, please fix it. Otherwise, all you should be doing is experimenting and playing around with Claude Code or Cursor or whatever tool that they used. Like, we want you in it. We're going to have training sessions. We're going to have lunch and learns. We're going to have boot camps. We're going to do all kinds of stuff together. But that's what that entire week is about. Take it off. Whatever we thought we were going to do, toss it out the window for now.
So I'm curious, because you're like right in the, at that leading edge conversation. How do you keep up with everything that's changing?
Oh my God, it's impossible. I get my own AI
That's
brain fry.
with FOMO, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I get my own AI brain fry around this stuff too, right? I know people who are much further ahead than me from a technical perspective in terms of understanding and using these tools. All of them also feel like they're continually struggling and always behind. Helen Cupp, who runs a group called Women Defining AI, is fantastic. And she is both a builder and a leader. And when she says that she can't keep up, I'm like, oh my God, but you're like miles ahead of me on this stuff. So what I try to do is understand, where are we now in terms of some of the best practices around what people are doing to drive adoption. So like, I read the research as well as try to talk with enough companies and organizations to get a sense of who's got, confidentially, who's got the bad example, but where I can get it publicly, where can I share a story from somebody who I think actually is getting it right? So the Affirm story was Barb Cadigan, who's the chief people officer there, sharing that and talking about, we're public about this. So please share that, like that week-long break that we take is an important thing. So to me, it's like, you got to like read the research and talk to people about it, but also you got to have your own boundaries. Like last Friday, about 2:00 in the afternoon, I hit a wall. It was just too much. The AI brain fry had hit me also, because I was trying to I was using an agent. I was cleaning up some notes. I just had 3 conversations. And at 2:00, I just shut the laptop, went outside, went for a run. Didn't touch anything for a day and a half, because you had to get my brain back in shape.
And here we circled right back to the beginning, right? So to me, it's like, it's almost like we had to go through COVID, because we had to go through this universal stop button that paused us, that had us asking questions about our lives and what mattered, right? That showed us different ways to get things done, that broke a lot of these, I called them unbundled the work systems, right? And then we brought AI in, and they sit in the same, they have to sit in the same infrastructure.
Yeah, it's just an acceleration of a lot of like this. There's this confluence, right? Because the technology changes that happened that enabled the sort of COVID experience that we had were already there. So broadband access and SaaS tools and all the rest of that kind of stuff that made it possible for us to keep working during a pandemic, but also put people under immense amounts of stress, and it made you reconsider what's important from a life perspective. We're sort of we are in a worse position now in some ways, right? We don't necessarily have the same threat of a pandemic that's sweeping across the globe, but we live in a very chaotic world at the moment, in a more dangerous feeling world in a lot of different ways. And A lot of people are experiencing that. And at the same time, you're feeling the pressure of, is AI going to take away my job? And so the ground feels like it's shifting under people simultaneously in a couple of different directions, which adds to the stress levels, which just makes human-centered leadership more important, not less, right? The command and control stuff that makes people feel like a cog in a wheel is not really going to get you to get the best out of your team at a time when they're already feeling stress from a bunch of different sources. If you can give them some anchoring, some sense of agency, some sense of purpose, you'll get a lot more positive benefits.
Yep. I think I'm hopeful because I truly believe that we are underestimating the unique human capabilities built into the things we do at work. So when you code, it's not just the lines. And when you build a PowerPoint, it's not just the graphics, right? And so when you start shifting the lines of code or the graphics over to tools, right? We're going to, if we don't think through what exactly remains, we'll just feel the loss when it's, a bit late and it shows up somewhere. So I think we'll figure it out. I think it's that pendulum thing right now that's driving organizations.
It's my hope as well. And I think also, again, attention gets drawn to the loudest voices. So, about a week and a half ago, Block announced that they were laying off 40% of their workforce and pointed towards AI. I actually wrote a pretty lengthy op-ed for the charter team on this one. There's lots of reasons to I think that one also might have been a bit of AI whitewashing, putting the blame on AI when there's a lot of other factors at work.
Yeah, and it could be AI, by the way, in the back end. So I'm thinking companies like Fiverr or Upwork, right, where it's the AI that's making some of that business model, obsolete or not very effective, which doesn't mean that the gig economy or the platform economy is gone. It just means that it needs to be transformed, and there was no reason for them to bother, right? So
there's some, there's some interesting stuff. Like I know some of the Upwork team, and I've seen they've published some of this data as well. Like what's happened is even in some of the areas like content generation, the jobs have changed, but the revenue is still there. What people are getting is more complex jobs. And the contractors also are the ones that are further ahead on adopting the AI tools because it's in their best interest, right?
Yeah, it works for me. It works for myself.
Yeah, exactly. We're much more into it. The other one is like anybody who tells you they know what the future is going to look like is, by definition, wrong. We had Sebastian Siemiatowski, who's the Klarna CEO, on stage at a charter event in New York last month, and he was sort of the poster child early on for AI adoption and displacing workers. And the story got a little mistold in the press and all that. But basically, he's changed his mind twice in pretty sizable ways around talent strategy and the impact of AI. One, they actually ended up bringing people back into the higher levels of the customer service function, right? Because he figured out that there's real value past the basic, like answer a question for a customer in the relationship, and that people wanted a relationship with a human being. Second was he talked about the fact that early on, when AI started showing up, he thought, all I'm ever going to need to hire again is engineers, because engineers can now do all these other things. And about a year later, he went, wait, I don't need any more engineers. I need relationship people, and I need salespeople. I need account managers, and I can give them tools to do basic bug fixes and other stuff like that. So, like, this is evolving rapidly. You're pivoting your talent strategy on a dime and making major changes before there's real evidence in your business that this thing's having an impact is a dangerous game.
Yeah, and even with engineers, I actually had a really interesting conversation with some leading edge engineers, and they were talking about, again, it's that vanilla versus unique, right? If they're doing very unique work, at least for now, that's not what the tools are capable of doing, because it's not about writing lines of code. It's about thinking through what's possible, which circles back. So Brian, I mean, I can keep going, but I'm going to start wrapping us up here. And what I always ask for towards the end is actually a question versus an answer. So what do you think is the question we should all be asking ourselves these days about the future of work?
Do you think you can get there? I'll give you maybe a different question than I was thinking about it originally. What kind of future do you want to create? I think the most fundamental for me in a lot of different ways is what future I want to see come to pass, because all of us do have agency in one way, shape, or form or another. Not just the CEO of an organization, but the people who live and operate within that organization. I think we're all very fearful of the future often, or sometimes we're optimistic about it. But I think we all have some degree of control over where it goes. And so think about like, how might I use these tools as one simple example of that? But how do I want to treat people? How do I want to build community? Who do I want to support? Why do I want to support them? Because I think we all have an opportunity to shape this in directions that we want to see happen, as opposed to feeling like we are on the rapids and along for the ride.
And I love that. And if we kind of circle back to return to office, I always had this sense of it wasn't that great. We were talking about work-life balance. We were talking about stress. We were talking about a lot of stuff that wasn't working. Why not move forward versus try to go back to something that, yeah. Well, okay. That's
Exactly.
Wow.
And we live in a world that's run, where social media kind of rules. And so the pithy statement is the thing that tends to win when the world's just more nuanced. We all know this, right? Like, I want and need human community. I want to be in connection with people. I get a lot more of the vibe and the understanding of people faster if I'm together with them in person for a period of time. But I also need separation. I also need quiet time. I also need an opportunity to put my head down and think and be separate from that. And I also don't want to commute every day of the week. Like, figuring out what that balance looks like on anything, whether it's time together versus time alone, whether it's like, where can these AI tools help us be more productive and more capable and more innovative and higher quality? And, where is it simply something that feels like I'm now, running on a treadmill? There's going to be a balance on all this stuff that people are going to have to find individually, and organizations are going to have to invest in experimentation and iteration to get there.
Yep, totally agree. Wow. Thank you, Brian, for joining me today. For more about Brian Elliott and his work, you'll find all the links in the podcast description. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow The Future of Less Work wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, the new social contract is a win-win between people or organizations. Your best people do not work because you tell them to or you measure them on it. They work because they want to, because by working for you, they're doing what's important to them in life. Till next time.